To every complex and difficult question, there is a simple answer, and it's wrong.
Welcome to our podcast. Today we're here with Mark and Claire from Nottingham City Council. Welcome to this session. I'm just going to ask you both to just introduce yourselves, if that's okay. Sort of, who are you? What do you do at the City Council?
Lovely, yeah, thanks. So I'm Mark Pollock, Prevent Coordinator for the City Council. I also do a lot of work around community cohesion. Been in that post for about 2.5 years now, and before that I was a police officer for 30 years. So it's a change of direction for me. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, great.
And I'm Claire. I am the Prevent Delivery Officer at Nottingham City Council. Been working with Mark and the team for just over 6 months now, actually. And before that, I was working in housing. And even before that, I was a teacher for quite some time. So a big change for me, but a very welcome one, and have been, as Mark said, loving it since I started.
Some quite varied experience, but clearly sort of quite relevant as well for what we're discussing.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you're in today because we're going to be talking about Online Safety Week. Can you just tell us about that? What's that about? What's its aim? What's its purpose?
Yeah, so the Prevent team, alongside some of our partners, such as the Safeguarding Adults Board and the Children's Safeguarding Partnership, have had awareness raising weeks in the past. So we did one in September around serious organised crime and Prevent. And to coincide with Safer Internet Day on the 10th of February this year, we thought it would be the perfect opportunity to have a week of awareness raising around online harms, online safety, having those discussions about the potential pitfalls of what there is online, but also the benefits as well, and how that can strengthen communities, but also to be aware of the issues that there are in the online space. So we've got a series of webinars throughout the week for professionals across local authorities, the voluntary sector, particularly of interest to anybody that's working with children or has safeguarding responsibilities. And our partners for the week are Nottinghamshire Police, Equation, Notts Victim Care. We're going to have a session from Deflect and Protect, one of our partners, for Prevent work. So there's going to be a variety of different topics, some around children and keeping children safe online and how they're using social media, some topics around domestic abuse and the use of technology, domestic abuse with older people and how technology can be used in abusive relationships effectively. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion panel to round the week off, just if anyone has any questions to pop along, and hopefully we can answer those and have a wider discussion around online safety and online harms.
Right, that sounds great. So something for everyone, really.
Yeah, we hope so. Yeah, we hope so.
So, I mean, what is it that online harms? I mean, it seems to me that it just exacerbates any sort of social issues that exist out there, whether it's around misogyny, whether it's around, radicalisation. What are the sorts of, how bad is it? What are the sorts of things that we're really talking about?
Well, I think we need to put it into context because, when I was growing up, we didn't live our lives online. We lived our lives out on the streets. We played, we spent time on the streets, and the adults around us made us aware of how, the benefits of being outside and doing stuff and living outdoors, but also the risks, and just that real world risks is something that we grew up just being aware of whilst we were going about our normal business. We're now spending more and more of our time online. I think there's some stats that say that 18 to 24-year-olds are spending over 5 hours a day online. And there's some brilliant benefits to that. The information we can get access to, the communications, the links, the friendships and so on that we can build up. But there are risks out there. And so it's just like the real world there. We need to be aware of those risks. We need to understand them. We need to protect the vulnerable people around us from those risks. And they are real. And I suppose whilst some of those risks certainly initially aren't physical risks, the access from those who would seek to abuse, to radicalise, to take advantage of vulnerable people on there, the access to those vulnerable people is much greater than it might be in the real world. So some of the risks are exactly the same. Some of them are slightly different, and we need to understand those.
I think just going on from what you were saying about growing up and living our lives more outside than online, I think I remember being taught from primary school about stranger danger and not talking to someone that might pull up in a car when you're walking home from school, or somebody in a shop, for example. But in the online space, that's been taken away because we might be communicating with strangers, even in a positive way. It might be comments on a thread or sharing opinions about something, discussing a news item, but you don't know who you're communicating with. And whilst that can also be fun and entertaining, and it can be also enlightening if they're sharing information and you're having that sense of community, there are a lot of dangers with not knowing who you're talking to online as well.
And has there been any work done that shows how online harm translates into real life harm?
Yeah, I mean, whilst it's not what we're really here to talk about today, you can look at child grooming, child sexual grooming, where a vulnerable child will be online, will communicate with somebody who they think may be another child, and then there's an arrangement to meet, and then that takes it into the real world. In our space, within the radicalisation sphere, we can see individuals, radicalisers, going into those areas where maybe vulnerable people might meet, talking to them, befriending them, taking them into another sphere from, say, a gaming area into a private chat, and then into a more secure chat, and then gradually over a period of time radicalising them, getting them into that echo chamber, and then potentially bringing them into a real world situation. So yes, absolutely, and that's obviously the big space where you can move across. But some of these harms can be conducted just purely online. They don't have to move into the real world. There's a lot of harm that can be conducted online.
Yeah. I think I'd first heard about that around after the EU referendum in 2016, where ill-informed comments made by Mr. Johnson, the Prime Minister at the time, it took days for them to be those sorts of negative comments that he'd made around Muslim women. It took days for people in real life to start saying them to people in the community. So, we saw that move from online into real life. And that was 10 years ago now. So, what are some of the more, so you've mentioned about radicalisation, extremism. Two words I'd like you to just explain, disinformation and misinformation. What are they, and what role do they play in some of these harms?
I mean, they're words that are thrown around very loosely at the moment. They're real buzzwords at the moment are the misinformation, disinformation, and actually malinformation, which is the next step across as well. So very briefly, misinformation is just incorrect information. It might be rumour, it might be stuff that's just got lost in translation. There's no intent behind it, but it's incorrect. Okay. And there's lots of that swirling around. Disinformation is information that is wrong, but is deliberately put out there to achieve an intent. So the people who are putting that disinformation out are doing it for a purpose. And there's lots of that out there. We need to be really conscious that there are a lot of people out there with motivation to put out disinformation to suit their causes. And whether that be, from a global politics, we need to be really conscious that there's lots of states out there that are pumping our social media full of disinformation to keep us really angry at each other. There might be people who just want to do it just for clicks because there's a financial imperative to keep putting that out there. Disinformation quite often is the information that will make us angry at each other. When we're angry, we keep clicking. And the pennies keep counting up for those individuals. And then some people just do it for kicks. There are trolls out there who do it for a laugh and will just put stuff out there just to see what their reaction is. And malinformation then is quite a nuanced one, because malinformation is information that may be correct. It may be absolutely right, but it's put out there for a particular purpose, usually a harmful purpose, and is only part of the picture. Right. So it might be selectively true, but doesn't give the listener or the person who's reading it the full picture that they can make a fully informed take on that.
Right. in terms of where this online harm happens, where is it? What are these spaces? Where are these forums?
I mean, the obvious place that most people will be aware of is social media. So, X, Instagram, and so on. That's where we understand that these places are, and I think that's where most of us would fix our attention. But there are others as well, and particularly gaming platforms are starting to become more and more of a recruiting ground for radicalisers. And there's a number of reasons behind that. Is one, a lot of them now have chat functions. So you play your games online. It's not a disc that you put in and play alone. You play these games online, and a lot of them have chat sidebars where, of course, gamers can chat and talk about whatever. But that also gives an opportunity for radicalisers to come in there and infiltrate games, particularly where they see people who may be susceptible to their messages might be meeting. So games, like Call of Duty and so on, where there's a shoot 'em up, there's a little bit of a macho type.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great recruiting ground for radicalisers. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that more and more games are now adaptable, where you can either build your own game from scratch or you can adapt other games. And more we're seeing a lot of games where they are reflecting real life terrorist incidents and they're reenacting those, how horrific as that sounds, where they are the enemy in the game is another out group, for whoever that might be, for those, whether that might be, the Jewish community, the Muslim community, other groups who are seen as the enemy. And the more that's normalised, the more that message just gets into those individuals who are playing that, who may come on and play it as a game. But the more you're sort of subliminally messaging in that out group, the more that thinking will get taken into the real world. So we need to be really, really conscious of the gaming space now.
And I think that there's another sort of element as well to that, is sort of gamification of language that we're using.
Yes,
even that, I've seen an image that was a ranking effectively of somebody who's perpetrated mass casualty attacks or a terrorist incident, and it's referred to as number of kills, or somebody is referring to improving the score of a person who had committed a terrorist attack previously. So I think there's that tendency that sort of, I wouldn't want to say normalizes the actions of these people, but it certainly allows the language used around it to be a lot more current, rather than talking about terms of murder and kill and death. We're talking about scores, and we're talking about number of kills that somebody has. And I think we also as well have, especially with live streaming now, and how difficult that can be to moderate, because it's not something that's recorded that then, can go back and be edited or changed or adapted in any way, shape or form. It's happening like that. And we've seen instances of terrorist attacks being filmed live. And this has been widely disseminated and people can access, and it's very, very difficult to stop that and to shut that down and to limit the access to live streaming. So that, I think, is something that perhaps needs to be looked at potentially as a way to how we would even begin to moderate something like live streams. And I think that feeds into a wider point, doesn't it, about sort of social media and gaming in particular can be very much a protective factor for people. It's something that they enjoy. It's a hobby. They might have friends that are online, a community that they feel safe in, particularly if they might be experiencing any form of isolation. They might be experiencing bullying, and they might be going through a particularly difficult time. That for them might be a safe space, but it can so easily be exploited by people who are looking for that opportunity to radicalize or to spread their own hateful messages.
The one of the real concerns that we've got at the moment is desensitization to violence, and Claire's touched on the live streaming, the gamification of terrorist incidents, which desensitizes people, but simply the imagery that is there if I was talking to you maybe 5 years ago, I'd be talking about some of the imagery that you can see on the dark web. You don't need to look in the dark web anymore to see hangings, beheadings, torture, gore. So the imagery that our young people are being exposed to now is beyond anything that my generation would have imagined. Now, most of them, are resilient and they will move on and they'll go, yeah, whatever. But some of them start to get obsessed with that, and they start to get this fascination with extreme violence. And for a number, that fascination with viewing it can then move into a fascination with actually committing it as well.
Yeah.
So we do need to be really aware of that.
I think that line between fact and fiction is just becoming increasingly blurred.
Absolutely.
There's certain films that I used to like Hostel and Saw. Now I find them quite difficult to watch.
Yeah. Because when we were watching those films, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all those things, you'd watch them behind the sofa and doing all that.
Oh, yeah.
But underneath it all, you knew that it was fiction. You knew that was fake blood. That was now, unfortunately, it's the real thing that people are seeing.
Definitely. And I think when I was at school, certainly if there was, I think this is just at the dawn, I'm exposing myself here, but really just at the dawn of social media and the internet, that there would be videos like that online, but they would be quite light touch. It would maybe be 5 seconds and there'd be something really quite nasty happening. And if anyone was to watch that, it would be done quite secretively, and you certainly wouldn't be telling your wider circle of friends. At least I wouldn't have been doing that. You sort of watch very quickly and then you sort of feel horrible for having seen it, and then you put it away and you try not to look at that again. But now that kind of content is longer, it's more vivid, it's up close. I think we can mention about the quite graphic video that was taken of Charlie Kirk's assassination that was really quite close up, and it's not censored in any way, shape or form, and that was on social media within minutes of that happening. That's certainly something that I, when I was at school, would never have seen, and it certainly would not have been shared. It would have been a very secretive action, but now it can be viewed without any real restrictions. If you can find it on social media, and then it can be shared without any real restrictions as well.
And then obviously the concern is that, when people are exposed to that sort of thing, that sort of the lack of sensitivity around it, and then that exposure to more and more, and that's that whole sort of radicalisation sort of process, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So in terms, your work is focused around extremism. Is there, how early can you identify these harms? Is there a pattern that you can notice where you can think, well, this content has a likelihood of actually escalating? Can you actually track it?
I think that it's prudent to say at this point that that's becoming quite difficult with the advent of things like AI.
Okay.
Now, whilst AI has many, many advantages, and I'm not enough of an expert to comment on the way that AI functions and all of the work that goes into building AI, I think I've certainly seen over the last year or so, particularly on social media, there's been a real uptick in AI generated content that to anybody that might just be scrolling certainly seems very, very real.
Right.
And that content is particularly harmful to certain communities. And it tends to push an agenda. It tends to push a particular narrative. Now, the issue is being able to distinguish that from what might be a real source of media. Now, a lot of the AI generated content on channels such as TikTok will have a tag at the bottom that says contains AI generated media. If you are not reading the comments, or if you're sort of scrolling quite quickly through, that might be easy to miss. And it is sometimes difficult to take that pause when you're consuming that much content and say, hang on a minute, is that actually correct? Is that a true representation of the knowledge that I have? And then it's knowing where to go from there and how to fact check. And then I think we come back to the question of having the time and the sources to be able to fact check everything that we see online. It's a very difficult thing to have to do.
I've got to say, I see more and more things and I think, is that real? Is that? Sometimes it's fairly obvious that it's AI. If you see an image of, like, say, King Charles flipping backwards, you sort of know that he's not really done that and that it's been generated. But sometimes, I mean, they're very clever, aren't they?
Very
Sometimes
clever,
it's very difficult to tell.
I saw a stat the other day that suggested that by the end of this year, the majority of stuff on social media will be AI generated. Because the troll farms, the bot farms, and so on that are putting stuff out are just so prolific because they can obviously type a lot quicker than certainly I can.
Yeah.
So they can pump our airwaves full of information a lot quicker than we can respond and challenge that. I mean, going back to the your original question about those early warning signs, I think if we look at the real world, we are becoming more polarized. We're becoming more entrenched in our views, and the centre isn't holding. So that's a sign itself. So the debates online become more and more angry, polarized. You've got that anonymity of being online. That creates the anger, and then it's very easy to step from Claire and I having a heated debate to me then seeing Claire as an enemy, then into dehumanizing her. And once I sort of dehumanize her, that then legitimizes me thinking, well, you know what, I could just take Claire out. So that ramp up to extremism is probably a lot shallower than it used to be now because of that polarization of society.
And I think we also have online, there is a tendency, I think, in certain spaces for it to become an echo chamber.
Yes, absolutely.
So whilst you're having that very much that us versus them thinking and, dehumanizing other people that don't align with what your view of the world can be, you also have that space where you're meeting people that are like-minded and that might share those opinions or even more extreme opinions. And if there's no challenge from that, and if there's no discourse around that, not even that it has to be an argument or a battle, just that there is an informed challenge about opinions that somebody may have, it's very easy to just receive the same messaging over and over again. And then that's more and more justification that what you think and what you feel is right.
There's a theory that says that if you hear a piece of information correctly or incorrectly, you hear a piece of information 4 times without it being challenged, your belief in that information becomes very difficult to shake. Even if you then get evidence to show that information is incorrect. And even less than 4 times, it can really inform your opinion. So that's where we can see, Claire talks about the echo chambers, where people are constantly reinforcing each other's views. And of course, again, going back to when I was growing up, you might have somebody who lived down the end of the street who had some weird and wonderful views or conspiracy theories. The chances of them interacting with somebody else who had those same views were probably relatively small because they were isolated. Of course, when you go online, you put in those views, you will find somebody who shares those views. They might live the other side of the world, but that's a very small space online. So that reinforces, that legitimizes your views, no matter how weird and wonderful those may be.
And do you find the types of online harm and hate are sort of fairly isolated, or do they sort of overlap? Like, do you see, extremist ideologies going along with, say, misogynistic attitudes and mapping over with other sort of forms of harm and hatred?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, misogyny sits across a lot of extremism. Misogyny is really on the rise now. We see the actors like Andrew Tate and some of the other individuals there who are pumping out really some quite vile misogynistic content that is grabbing particularly some young people. I always thought that we were on a general road to being more progressive as society went on. I have more progressive views than my parents. My children probably have more progressive views than me. But actually, there is a trend now for particularly some young sort of early teen boys who see these guys who are good looking, who are rich, driving flash cars, and are pumping out some very simplistic views on the world. And whilst misogyny may not be in itself a sort of a terrorist ideology, it's certainly an entry point into those, and it sits across those. So yes, you're absolutely right. We see a lot of overlap between some of those views.
I think that's the whole sort of manosphere debate, isn't it? I think I came across some statistics I think it was about 18 months ago, the Movember Foundation did some research, and I think it suggested 75% of young men are regularly accessing content on the manosphere, with the manosphere being that umbrella term for all those websites, blogs, mainly online communities that promote those really narrow and aggressive definitions of what it means to be a man.
Yes.
I think that was worrying in itself. What's even more worrying is there's very little that's counteracting that. Yeah. And obviously the government declared VOG as a national emergency last year. We've just had the launch of the 10-year VOG strategy just before Christmas, with a view to halving it within the next 10 years. But it seems to be something that's greatly needed right now. And I just wonder if we're too late. You know, are there times when there's not anything that we can do because it's escalated to such an extreme level? Do you find that in the work you do?
I don't think so. I would hope that's not the case. I think there's often, especially talking about things like the manosphere and misogyny, sort of being that thread that links a lot of extremist ideologies together. I do think that whilst it certainly has a strong presence online, and that you also have elements of, I guess, manosphere light that sort of filters out, where maybe perhaps somebody might not subscribe to the full ideology of the manosphere and wouldn't necessarily consider themselves an incel, for example, but there might be elements that they agree with. I think that's quite tricky to tackle. And I think there needs to be a lot of, in my opinion, needs to be a bit of work done to how these opinions proliferate, really. What's the driving force behind them? Why are people subscribing to these as you know, the done opinion, and there's no challenge to it? And I think unfortunately for a lot of these misogynistic incel manosphere communities online that exist, I think for some it's that sense of maybe community, isn't it? And that sense of maybe perhaps sharing feelings of social isolation, sharing feelings of anger, sharing feelings of inferiority perhaps, or feeling that there's not a space for them in society or in the world at the moment. And that's very difficult to break somebody away from if they feel that sense of camaraderie, almost, that sense of community. That's tricky to tackle. But I wouldn't want to say that that it's gone too far, or that there's no hope, because I think there always is going to be some hope of being able to turn back the tide. How much is another question, but I think that there is still that opportunity there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the next few years are going to be quite critical, because the pace of change in terms of online is just so quick, so fast. I mean, I don't understand. I'm here talking about it. Yeah. And I don't fully understand it. Yeah. I can only sort of describe it as maybe something, like it's like the Wild West. It's almost a lawless environment at the moment. There's debates, discussions now as to how we put in regulations, how we engage with that, how we monitor and what's going on. That then engages with freedom of speech, and there's some people who've got very genuine and legitimate concerns around how we engage with freedom of speech. But some of those actors have got their own interests as well. So there needs to be a really grown up debate around how the online space is regulated and monitored, so on now. But I think we can do it. I think we're slow to be getting to it. We're a bit behind the curve. It's so quick changing, but I think we'll get there. We'll get there.
So could you just, share some examples of things that you've done that have made a bit of a difference, that have actually maybe tried to sort of turn some of that negativity around, some things that you've...
Yeah.
I think it's quite important for us to have dialogue with the wider community, isn't it? And not to be seen as some sort of organisation that might be existing in the shadows, or that it's not clear what our aims are or what our objectives are. And I think putting ourselves out there and reaching out to people across all different organisations, across all different sectors of society, is quite important. And obviously those things take time. You know, building relationships takes time, raising awareness takes time, but it's an investment that I think is particularly worth it, considering wider community cohesion, wider issues that we're facing at the moment, such as misogyny, is what we were talking about earlier. I think it's worth putting that investment into building those relationships across all different organisations, not just for us.
Yeah. And we've invested in a number of projects that are going in particularly into schools at the moment to try and encourage some of that critical thinking. So one that we're investing in the moment, I think Claire referred to Deflect and Protect. Really inspirational individual who goes into schools, talks to young people in their language. You know, he absolutely gets the environment that he's talking about, and just weaves in some of the risks and talks to them about some of the issues that they can face there. And then we also do stuff around critical thinking, because there's a lot of the radicalised will find or will offer very simple answers to really complex issues. The world is a really complex space, and it's, you know, it's more complex in the online space. But a lot of people sell, the snake oil salesman are quite prepared to sell a very simple answer, particularly if it's offering a scapegoat for people's problems. Very simple answer. And what we're trying to do is actually get across the message that there actually aren't any simple answers to many issues now. I've come across my work, I've came across a really inspirational individual who was a Holocaust survivor, and he used to go and give talks in schools and so on. I think he still does. But he wore a T-shirt, and on the front of the T-shirt it said, "To every complex and difficult question, there is a simple answer." And then on the back of the T-shirt it said, "And it's wrong." And I thought that was just perfect.
Yeah.
You know, we all look for simple answers. We all look to try and box things into simple areas. And actually, the more we can get across the message that there actually aren't any, and, you know, try to give people those critical thinking skills, I think the more people will then be able to themselves interpret what they're reading in a more constructive way, in a more informed way.
And I think that journey to finding the answer, if ever the answer is to be found, does start with learning and being aware. Yeah. It might not be that somebody, as you mentioned before, Mark, the online world changes so quickly that information we might be talking about today will be out of date next week. And certainly things that were, you know, trending or popular a year ago, now nobody ever talks about. That's a given. But I think being at least aware of groups that might use the online world as a hunting ground effectively is a place to start. Learning about, you know, some drivers behind different ideologies and just being aware. It doesn't have to necessarily be an academic pursuit of learning. I think it's just having that awareness of what people are facing online, and then that, I think, can be a building block then to perhaps maybe finding an answer. If there is one, there might well not be.
And being open to sort of, you know, have different views coming in. I remember doing some training, and there were some young people as well as some adults that worked with them. And one of the boys sort of very early in the training said, "Can I just ask you, what do you think of Andrew Tate?" And one of the tutors sort of said, "Look, we're not talking about that." And he goes, no, but I really want. And I said, "Look, it's okay." I said, it's all right. Those are valid questions. I said, if he's only ever going to have access to the information he's accessing, then that's all he's going to think about. I said, it's important that we actually have those spaces and opportunities. So we had a conversation, and I said, well, you know, I have some really serious concerns about some of the things that he says. And he was interested. He said, well, like what? And we actually ended, you know, it took 20 minutes out of the training, which wasn't planned, but it was an important discussion. I think sometimes we try and sort of stop that, but we actually need to open up a little bit more and have more information coming in.
Well, one of the criticisms that Prevent sometimes faces is that it's designed to shut down debate, shut down discussion. You know, it's a chilling effect. And I would argue that, you know, it's the very opposite. Is we want to encourage constructive, respectful dialogue. With the Israel-Gaza crisis at the moment, there's very strong views out there, and understandably really strong views. And there was a narrative that said, if children talk about gas, they'll get referred to Prevent. And one, that's not true, and two, it makes Prevent sound like a punishment. We were actually working with providers to go into schools and encourage discussion.
Yeah.
Talk about these things, talk about what are incredibly difficult issues, but talk about them in a respectful, understanding and informed way. One of the things I'd love to see is a sort of a rise of debating societies.
Yeah.
Where we can have really strong views, but we discuss them in a sort of an environment where there are rules.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's been lost.
So with respect for others. And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I always say, if we treat people with respect and dignity, you can't go far wrong. Yes. If you make a mistake, if you have a different view, people will normally, take that on board.
Yes.
But it's when we're hostile, it's when we're,
you attack the person rather than the view.
Yeah. And I think you can also, in a space where you're having that conversation, whether it's in a podcast or whether it's a training session or a debate, whatever that space is, I think two things can be true. You can have somebody that might sit and express their opinions, their point of view. You might not like it, you might not agree with it, it might not be your standpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean that, they don't have a space for their opinion, obviously within reason. But I think we've lost sort of that ability to accept that this person sitting in front of me might have a very different opinion and might have a very different viewpoint to me, but I can still have a discussion with them and explain that my point of view is considerably different to theirs, but we can have that conversation and we can pick apart why we might think certain things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no space for either of those points.
And I think one of the things that we're really trying to get across as well is giving parents and carers the skills to talk to their children, their loved ones, about some of these difficult issues, particularly where they don't quite understand the environment that kids are on these days. But I'm not sure that that's absolutely essential. A broad awareness of what some of the platforms are is really useful, but it's more about the narratives. And when, the young people come out and they parrot some of the narratives that they're hearing online, is, as you say, not shutting it down. Not going, that's off, we're not going to talk about that. Is, okay, so where have you heard that? Who was the person who was putting forward those views? Do you understand where that person is coming from? What might their motivations have been? And then, do you think that there might be somewhere else that you could get other information on that subject? So rather than shutting it down, actually opening it up and going, okay, so you're interested in that subject, you've got this particular take. Let's hear if somebody else has got a different view on that subject. And that's a really broadening experience then for the young people. So we're trying to get that across to parents as well. And there's some really useful material online with Act Early, which government website, which in very simple terms gives a few step-by-step processes that parents and carers and professionals can follow in terms of managing that discussion.
Yeah. So, this is nowhere near long enough to actually explore all the things that we could have explored in this session. But I just want to finish on, if there's somebody out there that maybe comes across something that they feel, concerned about, or that they feel that they're being caused some harm, or they're concerned about somebody else, what are some of the things that they can do to actually try and help?
I think you said before, the first thing is to reach out to that individual, talk to the individual, explore the issues. Don't shut down the discussion. For goodness sake, don't say, oh, that's awful, you're an awful person for looking at that. Yeah. Open up the discussion with them, talk to them about it, explore what they've seen, who's put that material on, why they've got those views, what an alternative view might be, and where to find other information that might give them a different perspective. If they've got particular concerns, there's lots of material online. I think you're maybe going to put some of the links to some of the useful information in the description for this podcast, so that'd be really helpful. Yeah. Things like Act Early. If people have got a real concern around somebody around them who is well on that way to being radicalised towards extremism, towards terrorism, we would really strongly say, look, reach out for support.
Right.
There's lots of support out there, either through us, through the Prevent Team, through the Police Prevent Team. You can go onto the City Council Prevent pages and it'll talk you through what you can do, the sort of support that's out there. There are specially trained intervention providers that we can put those individuals in touch with, mentors and so on. So you're not alone. That's the key message.
Yeah.
You're not alone. There are people out there, including ourselves, who can support. And if you don't want to to reach out initially to us, look online for some of those resources that are there.
And that's the same if you come across harmful content yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's important, isn't it, that reaching out for support isn't a process of demonisation or criminalisation there, especially with talking to prevent. It's a supportive process. I think that's the key to this, that there is support available out there and that people shouldn't be afraid to look for that support because it is available and it will be supportive. I feel like I've said supportive many times. It will be supportive.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for coming in and giving us an overview. And I think, just encourage people that are listening to this podcast to look out for some of these activities around Online Safety Week. Look at the resources that are, in the link. I guess we'll need to have you back to explore some of the bigger areas around this another time. But thank you very much for coming in.
No problem. Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers.